What's up guys, this is Pseychie and welcome back once again to another item showcase. This will probably be the last showcase of the year. So concluding with my final favorite weapon of the last crossover update, we have the Throwable Object. This is the crossover item with Katana Zero, which is a game I actually haven't played yet, but it certainly looks pretty interesting. The idea of this is pretty unique, though I'm pretty sure it has something to do with how it works in Katana Zero. You throw the knife-like object, it stuns an enemy, and then you have to kill other enemies to get back ammo. This means you can basically throw one knife per enemy. In Biomes this works fantastic, because the enemies are already pretty small, you don't really even have to throw one to get them, and if you get the piercing affix on the throwable object, it's even better. Now, normally I believe it comes with 3 ammo, but there is an affix in the game where you can get 3 extra, though I'm not sure how it interacts with the ammo mutation. But having 6 instead of 3 is a lot better than just having 3. So this early into the run, I was still kind of experimenting with the throwable object here and there. I was being really cautious of when to throw ones, as I didn't want to run out of ammo. But later on into the run, I realized that it's really not an issue at all in Biomes. You can spam out the knife pretty casually. Yes, you only have 6 shots, so if you use up everything, then you gotta fall back on your main weapon for a while, but I overall didn't find it to be that big of an issue. That being said, the throwable object is most definitely a support weapon, just like the laser glaive. You use it to stun enemies, and that's pretty much all it does. What you can pair this up is a lot of slow, heavy weapons. So I think this really goes into like a heavier side of survival where it's more aggressive, you just go in, stun enemies, and then just hit them with whatever you got in your hands. So a lot of interesting weapons I can think of, like the toothpick, the oven axe, the war spear, even the flint, and in this case specifically, I wanted to use the symmetrical lance. I think out of the heavy weapons, this is definitely one of my favorite ones in the game. The range on it is huge, and I think it strikes the perfect balance between speed and damage. Because something you don't really have to worry about when playing a lot of heavy weapons is that you don't really have to worry too much about doing the critical hit condition. Stuff like the oven axe or even the wrecking ball or the toothpick, even without the crit, they hit pretty hard. Same thing goes for the symmetrical lance. Once in a while, you do get the crit, it's always nice to see, and I love the fact that they added a UI feature where if the critical hit condition is activated, then your weapon in the UI will glow. I don't know how I've never noticed that before, but it is a quality of life improvement that's really nice to see. So against those buzz cutters, you can essentially just throw one, it kills it, and then it replenishes your ammo. So it makes a lot of these smaller flying enemies look like small fry, which is an ability that's very valuable to have. You can even use this in tactics. If you want a fast firing weapon, you can essentially guarantee that no enemies will ever attack you while you're running a glass cannon build. So love the variety, I love the different ways you can play it. And of course, addressing the elephant in the room, the throwable object does not work very well in bosses, just like the laser glaive, but I will have a backup strategy to kind of counteract that later on. In fact, I already have it in my backpack, and that is the rampart shield. I think if you're playing survival as a more aggressive playstyle, using the rampart shield is a very powerful tool in bosses. It allows you to get in damage in ways you would have never have done without it. But I'll let the footage speak for itself once we get to the boss fights. In the meantime, even though the corrupted prison doesn't really have a lot of enemies that are grouped up together, even single target, even when the sim lance is not critting at all, the damage is still fairly respectable. So yeah, with these stall tactics, I'm able to breeze through the early game without any trouble at all. Because 5BC gets really frantic at times, the throwable object essentially stops all enemies in their tracks. which means if you drop down into a crowd of enemies and there's too many of them and they're about to attack you all at the same time, just toss down your knives and everything gets stunned while you dish out whatever damage. So now I'm going to lean into a more different strategy. I picked up a new mutation, the Wish mutation. It was introduced 2 updates ago, where if you pick up an item, it will transform that item into its legendary variant. But you also can't get rid of the mutation once it is used. So it has some pretty hefty drawbacks, but in this case, since this is custom mode, I wanted to guarantee myself a certain weapon, because the legendary affix for the weapon that I'm talking about is extremely overpowered. So right now, going through the ancient sewers, with a fairly respectable amount of scroll stats, you stun the enemies and then you charge up whatever weapon you got. Now, of course, the natural thing to do in this case is to pair up the throwable object with the katana, since, as I'm sure that's what the developers would have wanted, is to have you kind of cosplay as the character in Katana Zero. But on a gameplay level, I'm sure it works fine. It's just that they have different colors, and it makes it a little bit awkward to use together. And not only that, I've already featured the katana twice on this channel already. It was actually my first weapon that I showcased on this channel. So right after we deal with this elite, I'm gonna get into the shop and I'm going to fish for the weapon that I was looking for. And it's not really a surprise, but that weapon is the symmetrical lance. It has a unique affix on the legendary variant where it deals 300% of its damage with no drawback. That is just insane. Now, it is a somewhat hefty sacrifice, as now I only have 2 mutation slots to work with. But against Conjunctivius, I just wanted to get her into the wolf traps and then just swing away with this giant lance I got. Now, something I found out is that the stun grenade is actually really good in the tier 1 boss fights, and this is especially true in boss rush. So if you're looking to get the no-hits, people have found out that carrying the stun grenade will basically lock down a lot of the tier 1 bosses. So Conjunctivius, and there's Concierge and Mama Tick. Of course, the same cannot be said about the later bosses. So the stun grenade is admittedly pretty good in the early game, but against the endgame bosses, the effect of the stun is very, very limited. But as Conjunctivius is stalling for time here, let me just talk a little bit about what I've been up to recently. So during the holidays, I've been catching up on a lot of TV shows and anime. Arcane blew me away, though I'm probably not gonna play League of Legends. The Cyberpunk anime was amazing. I've also finished JoJo Part 6, which is one of my favorite anime series of all time. Also caught the new Avatar movie, though something I couldn't believe is that the movie itself was 3 hours long. So we got tickets to go in at like 9:30 p.m. and then we only got home until 1 a.m. Like it ran for 3 hours. But the movie was great. I wouldn't say it had the same groundbreaking achievements as the first one did, but as a blockbuster, it's still certainly a very good film. I've also been watching some early 2000s anime. Well, actually one anime that came out from the 90s I'm watching right now is Yu Yu Hakusho. It's the same author that wrote Hunter x Hunter. I think there's a lot of stuff that just can't be expressed in today's media. Like, you look back at the old SpongeBob cartoons, and there's a lot of subliminal and, like, adult jokes in there. And it just really makes you wonder that the early days of the internet, you could get away with a lot of bizarre stuff in your TV shows or movies. But now, with the regulations, with everything that's been going on, especially on YouTube, you just can't do stuff as freely anymore. Because as the shows that came out back then, there's no more. Like, anything that have come out, it's all there ever will be. So yeah, I think there's a lot of value in watching a lot of the old films and TV shows. Anyways, of course, the one time I forgot to hit the record button is in the transition area, is where I got the legendary grappling hook. This is because I just simply forgot to hit record, and since I no-hitted Conjunctivius, that was the reward that you get. I forgot what the legendary affix on the hook was, but come on, it's the grappling hook. It's just gonna be pretty decent overall. Just like the throwable objects, you can stun things for like a brief second with the grappling hook. In fact, that's exactly what I did with the baseball bat. And here is where I will be using the throwable objects a bit more liberally. I'm no longer really worried about being restrained by the ammo count. I'm just kind of throwing some knives here and there, since a lot of the graveyard is filled by small rats, and they're not really gonna pose too much of a threat. Even against bigger targets, Just throw one down and they will be stunned. Other than the giant birds, you can essentially stun anything. Some of the footage here, I'm basically just spamming out the knives and there's nothing the monsters can do about it. The game has never had any good stun support because most of the stun in the game came from really fringe applications like the stun grenade, which has a cooldown, and then there is the cudgel, which is a shield and you have to parry with it, so you still have to play really defensively. And the stun doesn't last for that long. For this curse, I definitely had a little bit of a close call there with the rat, but everything turned out okay. Against these giant platforms with rats, because, you know, it's usually the rats that chip damage at you. It's usually those things that end my curses, that if you're like in a panic, you can just spam out the knives. And since they'll guarantee that they die in one hit, you don't even have to worry about ammo. So, this late into the run, I'm gonna attempt the bank. I think at this stage of the game, I have an established build to challenge possibly one of the hardest biomes in the game. Coming here does have its risks, and I think entering the bank at different points in your run will have an impact on your outcome. So in this case, I believe the bank replaces the cavern, which means the tiers of items in the shops here will also have the same tiers as the cavern, which is great. Of course, this is also where I first learned that there is a guaranteed curse chest in the bank, and because of how many things can go wrong here, I get pretty anxious when getting curses this late into the run. But with the stun potential of the throwable object, like if you see that an enemy is about to toss a bomb your way, if you see that a rampager is about to rush at you and you don't know if you can dodge it in time, you just press triangle and then they will be stunned. As for the bank, I think the only points where I would not go to the bank is if it appears as the second or third biome. And when I say third, I mean it replaces the prison biomes, so corrupted prison or prison depths. So I ultimately don't know that much about how the bank works on a mechanical level. I just know that its shops will have the same tier of items as whatever biome has the highest possible tier. So if it appeared replacing ancient sewers, then it's going to have the same tier of shop items as the ancient sewers. Because out of ramparts, morass, the ossuary, the ancient sewers has the highest tier of shop items, so that is the type of shop that the bank will spawn if you go there. This also means the biome will also give out the amount of stats that's equivalent to the biome that gives out the most in their respective stages in the run. So because it replaces the cavern, whatever amount of scrolls that the cavern is supposed to give me is going to appear in the bank. Now, I firmly believe you should not enter the bank on the second or third level, and this is because the enemies don't scale that well in the early game, so if you don't have an established build, you are going to struggle a little bit. Same goes for the third biome. Since the bank is already so big, if it replaces corrupted prison, it's only going to have one scroll in there, because the optional prison biomes only have one scroll, which is from the curse chest in the beginning. I definitely had some run-ins with those experiences, and I think any biomes after those ones are valid times to enter the bank. Because once you overcome the hurdle of beating the first boss, your build is established. Well, most of the time. So you'll most likely be very prepared of what you're encountering. And this is where one of the toughest enemies in the bank is going to be somewhat of a nuisance. Those gold gorgers will grow depending on how much gold is extracted from other enemies. So knocked out a little bit of my health. I had to use a flask, but good thing there's some food lying around, and the symmetrical lance is just extremely overpowered. This late into the run, you can see how the throwable object is essentially shredding through everything. Even if the enemy is a little too big, even if it takes 2 hits to kill them, it's still not bad. As you can see, I'm still not having any trouble with the ammo count. And the auto-targeting on it is quite nice. Sure, you do have to swing with your lance once in a while, but even as a support weapon, the damage is a lot. Like, it is nothing to laugh at. So I'm going to buy a flask, and then of course the mimic shows up, and then if you kill the mimic, you get 2 flasks. Which I actually didn't know. I mean, spending 20,000 for 2 flasks is insane value. But from what I've heard and some experiences myself, the Mimic is a fairly formidable opponent to beat. So going up against a giant, slow weapons do have a little bit of trouble dealing with the floating fists. Definitely gonna get hit here and there. And I didn't bother switching to ramparts as I didn't feel it was that necessary. The giant is hard, but a lot of its attacks are slow. So there we go. So we're gonna face Hand of the King now. And then here I realized that this annoying bug was happening where the achievements just keep popping up. So you're gonna have to excuse that for the rest of the run. I did try to go to the main menu and come back, but that apparently did not fix it. So, in this case, the Throwable Objects undoubtedly will not work against Hand of the King. Even if he can be stunned, it's not going to be very easy. So what's something you can do is to use the Rampart Shield. So for example, if Hand of the King is using like triple strike attack, you can parry the first one, which gives you iframes, and then you can just smack the boss with your full combo without ever worrying about getting hit. And again, the achievements is a weird bug that I've never encountered before, but it's gonna keep popping up, so hopefully that doesn't take too much away from the run. So if we wait for the right moment, Hand of the King does his moves. Hand of the King is going to do his triple strike, and then once he does the second one, I'm able to just ignore the third time he attacked because I have iframes. So you can play your weapons really aggressively this way. And I definitely think the Rampart Shield is a lot better than what some people give it credit for. Entering the 5 BC biome. This is the final stage of the game. With an average amount of scroll counts, I really didn't expect this to be too much trouble. Now, because of scaling, the Throwable Object doesn't seem to one-shot enemies anymore, but what is something that it's really good at is dealing with the Librarians. Since Librarians are probably one of the most annoying enemies in the Astrolab, having a weapon that can auto-target and take it out in one go is just really valuable, and it can save you in a lot of situations. So yeah, in biomes, the Throwable Object is very good. Now, I don't know the exact amount of time that the enemies are stunned, but from what I can tell, any kind of weapons that you're setting up should be able to land its hits in time. A weapon I will probably compare it to is Ice Shards, at least the old version of Ice Shards. Back when dual binding was a thing, you can essentially just pop Ice Shards and then use Kill Rhythm, and essentially nothing can stand in your way. It really fit a aggressive playstyle for survival. You can still do it, but it will disable achievements now. The Throwable Object, at least I like to imagine, is just a soft Ice Shards. It's essentially the same strategy, but there is a limit of how much you can use it. So yeah, despite looking really simple, I really think this weapon brings a lot to the table. And overall, this run was fine. I did not have any trouble with using the weapons. It's a simple strategy, but it's really effective. So we're gonna catch our bearings, and we're gonna go face off against the Collector. And I'm not sure if this is intentional or not, but if you get the legendary version of the Symmetrical Lance, you get a second unique affix on it. It says that it can break shields, so I am assuming that this is actually a bug, as you can only get this affix if you beat Hand of the King for the very first time. So it's the ending where you break the shield of the king and then you kill him for the ending. I'm not sure why it does that, but it's able to appear on the Symmetrical Lance that I am holding right now. Now you might think that since the shield for the king is a special case, it shouldn't apply in this fight at all. But something I noticed is that it actually does work in the Collector boss fight, which is pretty funny, though I have to assume that it is a bug and you're not supposed to be able to do that. So we're gonna get the Collector down to 2 heals, and as you saw a brief second there, I noticed that too, is that once it has the shield up, you can still hit him. So the affix where the lance can break shields still applies here. Now you might be thinking, sure, it's probably like a couple seconds to shave off your fight, but once we get to the 3rd heal, this is where things get really insane. As you can see, I'm able to just knock the flask out of his hands, and then completely skip the 4th phase. And there we go, that is a flawless Collector fight. Definitely think that's a bug. I don't know how long it's been in the game, but it kinda reminds me of that old Barb Tips bug where he drops a flask on the 3rd heal as well, which is pretty hilarious. Anyways, this has been a showcase of the Throwable Objects. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. Definitely try throwing out those small knives for yourself, and you just might find a lot of success when playing survival. So hopefully you've enjoyed this last showcase of the year, and have a good Christmas.